actually add it. We could add it to the next meeting's agenda, but because it's not listed as an action item, there's no way we can actually vote on something here tonight. It needs to be posted at least 72 hours in advance.
That is correct, and I apologize. I thought this was just an informational item when I put it on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Obviously,
okay.
we can make our positions individually known, but as a board, we can't take action on it.
Okay.
Mark, you're muted. So with that in mind, I'm still looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
We have a second? Mr. Chavez, second. Okay. Any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
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 Okay.
Aye.
And we have, for information, the Proposition 15 WTA presenting. I believe that falls on you, Tessa.
Just in the nick of time, Dawn was able to sign on. Dawn and I are both very familiar and able to speak to Proposition 15. However, our local girl, our local gal Dawn, is actually a representative for our state council, and she has been meeting over the last couple of years down in Los Angeles with 300 other people as we worked on getting this proposition put together. So I've asked her to do the presentation for this evening. And
all right.
Mark has it up, and are you ready to go, Dawn?
Yeah.
Do you see it on the screen, Dawn?
Yes, I see it. Thank you. All right, you can go to the next one. All right, so Prop 15 is the California Schools and Local Communities First Funding Act. It is an investment in our students and their future. Great teachers, great schools, great communities. Keep in mind, this isn't just for schools, it is our communities. Okay, next one. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, yet it's only 39th in the nation in per pupil spending. Has the highest adjusted poverty rate in the country, with 1 in 5 children living in poverty. We know that rate's higher here in Mendocino County. Our libraries, hospitals, fire departments, and community services are suffering from a lack of funding. We see this with our police department, the fact that we have another measure on the ballot to fund a sales tax increase. So this would help as well. Next. So why have California schools been so drastically underfunded compared to the rest of the nation? And this video was actually made by a student. So if you would click the video.
Come on.
Come on, Vanna, get it right. No.
Let me.
Hopefully it'll play.
You know what? I'm going to go to present mode and see if it'll do it in present.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that's going to do to you guys' screen.
Hit F5.
Are you seeing that still?
Yeah.
It's Luke.
Looks great, Mark.
Thank you for all your help.
Come on.
Now you know what it's like trying to teach and show videos. Zoom at the same time.
Most Americans go through the public school system. A good education is essential for getting a decent job, supporting a family, and contributing as a citizen in our democracy. But did you know that almost all other states spend more per student on education than California? In fact, in recent years, California has spent nearly $2,500 less per student than the national average. In every other state, teachers, librarians, and guidance counselors teach and support fewer students, so each student can get more attention. Why is this? How do schools in California get their funding, and who decides how much? Most of the money for schools comes from taxes collected from people and businesses. You pay sales tax on the items you buy, income tax on the wages you earn or the profits a business makes, and property taxes on buildings and land. In an average California school district, state and local property taxes make up about 8% of funding, whereas the U.S. government also has local revenues like interest and fundraisers make up the rest. The amount of money your local school district gets is linked to the number of students in each grade, certain student characteristics, and student attendance. When students are absent a lot, schools lose money. So how come California schools don't have enough money? Let's take a look at how schools were funded in the 1970s when California schools were considered to be excellent, but their student attendance was consistently above the national average. Local property taxes made up 60% of the funding for schools, and the state contributed about 34%. Then, in 1978, Proposition 13 was passed, which slashed property taxes by an average of 60%. Limited property tax rate increases for residential and commercial property, and eliminated the ability for school districts to increase their property tax rates for school programs. Quickly, school funding in California fell below the national average, and a few years later, in 1988, Congress passed another law, Proposition 98. This law provides a protected portion of the state budget for schools, and when the economy improves, school funding improves with it. Unfortunately, 2 years later, Proposition 111 modified Proposition 98 to include provisions which allow the Proposition 98 guarantee to decrease in years when the state budget shrinks. Even after all of this, California per student spending was still well below the national average. In 2012, CTA, Governor Brown, and many others supported Proposition 30, which provided a temporary modest increase in sales tax and an increase in personal income tax for very high earners. Due to the recent passage of Proposition 55, we successfully maintained the increase in personal income taxes for high earners until 2030. California schools avoided drastic cuts and have seen significant funding increases due to voter support of these propositions. But even with the gains made, California schools are still funded below the national average. How do we get more funding for schools? Clearly, Proposition 13 hurt public school funding, and it has never really recovered. Proposition 98 gives schools a guaranteed portion of the state budget pie, but the state budget isn't always reliable. What can we do about it? Voters and the public need to rethink Proposition 13. Most people don't realize that before Proposition 13, commercial and residential property taxes were about evenly divided. Today, residential property taxes make up over 70% of the tax revenue from property taxes. That means people, not businesses, are paying more of the taxes, and that was never the stated intent of Proposition 13, keeping grandma from losing her home when property values soared. How do we grow the state budget revenue pie? Close tax loopholes, expanding the tax base, increased economic development, increasing tax rates. Everything should be on the table for discussion about how to make sure the fifth largest economy in the world can support the public services its citizens want and need. Remember, well-funded schools with successful students are a public good and help build strong communities. Understanding how California schools are funded can help you become a better advocate for students and your community.
So the cost of funding state services has shifted from corporate to personal income taxpayers. When Proposition 13 was passed, responsibility for funding public schools shifted from the taxpayer to the state. We must reevaluate how we are
strong communities.
Hold on.
Most Americans go through the public school system, and we know a good education is essential for getting a decent job.
Stop.
There we go. We must reevaluate how we are funding our government and make it fair and equitable. The fact of the matter is California is a moderate tax state, ranking 15th in taxes and fees compared to other states, even though we have the 5th largest economy in the world. Investing in public education, dollar for dollar, grows the economy more than tax cuts and corporate subsidies. Disheartening, I can't say that word. California currently ranks 39th in per pupil spending. Our goal is simply to have the adequate amount of per pupil funding needed to provide all the students the opportunity for a quality public education. So we've had over 4 decades of wealthy investors and big corporations have used a loophole to avoid paying their fair share of property taxes. As a result, California's school funding has been falling behind and local services has been cut. So the Schools and Communities First will reclaim $12 billion each year to ensure that our schools and communities come first. We can fix the Prop 13 corporate tax loophole while protecting homeowners, small businesses, and agriculture. You can change it. Prop 15, the Schools and Local Communities First Funding Act, is a credible plan to ensure $12 billion is invested in our schools and communities, $5 billion for our schools annually. Funds can be negotiated to promote retention of great educators, manageable class sizes, and more supports for our students, which I know that is something that all of us want. Next one. What it does, it reclaims over $12 billion per year for K-12 schools, community colleges, and local communities. It closes the commercial property tax loopholes that allow the big corporations to avoid paying their fair share, and it invests in truly educating our kids in vital services to support our families. And if you go online to see who opposes this, you're going to see that the people who oppose it are the big corporations in California, because they don't want to pay their fair share. You can change it. So who is impacted? It's commercial and industrial properties worth over $3 million. It is not going to affect residential property owners, and agriculture is excluded from this. You can change it. Where will the revenue go? So 60% stays in the local community and 40% to public education. And then when you break that down, 11% out of that 40% will go to the community college, and 89% will stay with us for K through 12. So these are some of the things that will be funded: schools, colleges, health clinics, firefighters and first responders, parks, libraries, roads and bridges, and senior services, all things that are really important to our community. And I know impact my life, and I'm sure impact your life as well. And there is tax relief for small business owners as well in this. So this is what is estimated for our school district, $1 million annually. Now, what could we do with $1 million annually? I think we could do a lot to support our students. And I think that is my last slide. Oh wait, last slide, I think. Prop 15, the Schools and Local Communities First Act funding. Our students can't wait. They deserve well-funded schools and community services now. People who know about Schools and Communities First want to vote yes. Our wealthy corporate opponents will outspend us on campaign ads, but we have people power. So thank you, and you can follow us on yes15.org or on facebook.com, Schools First California. And that's it. Thank you. Hope you'll vote yes on it.
Well done, Don.
Thank you.
So Don, can you answer some questions related to Proposition 15?
I can try.
One of those slides suggested that residential properties would be reassessed every 3 years.
So as it is, local property taxes, what I saw for residential, goes up 2% annual. It can only go up 2% annually. So now it'll be reassessed every 3 years, just at that 2% base. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like it's not going to be on the assessed value, but it'll stay where it was at its purchased value.
So,
So it's still they're still protected.
got it. So the next question I have for you was on that same slide, it also indicated that commercial properties, for example, let's say, for example, I had 3 commercial properties, and each of those commercial properties were worth $1 million. Since they're under that $3 million threshold, but the aggregate total is over $3 million, what happens?
So I believe that every property is separate. I don't believe they combine them. Because one of the things that I had read about was that business renters were really concerned about their rents going up. And so what I understood is that it's not a combined, it's on that piece of property only.
And then my next question is
Is that what you know, Tessa? Is that what you believe to be true?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, sorry, I'm not good at explaining all this as much.
That's
But
okay. I mean, you could cruise back through your, when you're done it, please, somebody email me the PowerPoint presentation, because I'd like to go through that a little more closely. The other part I'm concerned about is the distribution of those funds. That doesn't look like it's, I mean, when I look at the distribution of those funds, if this was truly about education, we'd be using road taxes and things like that to deal with bridges and things like that. And having come from the fire service, I understand exactly where the fire service is in relation to a lot of this stuff, and we have options of getting our own funds, if you will. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I guess what I'm really trying to say here is I'd love it if Proposition 15 was not in bed with a whole bunch of different agencies trying to get money. I'd far rather the vast majority of it went through K-12 through community colleges, and the vast bulk of it coming to K-12. If I take a look at our budget of about $20 million and add $1 million to it, we're only looking at basically a 5% increase, which isn't a whole lot of money. And I would argue that it's not going to raise us a whole lot above that 39th amongst the rest of the state's threshold that we're currently at. I am much more in favor of our state reapportioning the money that they've already got and quit wasting it on pet projects and things that are, quite frankly, way too expensive and ridiculous. I personally think our state has more than enough money to properly fund K-12 education if they would just simply do a better job of prioritizing their funding. But am I in support of Proposition 15? Yeah, I'm probably going to vote for it, but I'm disappointed in the way it's written, because I think more of it should go towards K-12.
My only comment on 15 is that if you really want to help local schools, vote yes on I, because you can drive by Blosser and see a new roof and the high school and see a new parking lot. You know you're going to get your money's worth there. You can go see it. That's always the concern, is when the government's going to help us. You know, we're this big in the ocean, and so I'm always looking about them. But I'll take $1 million if they'll give it to us, for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Mark's saying there with respect to Proposition 15 as opposed to Measure I on the current ballot. It's my opinion that our schools are grossly underfunded in California, and what that really means is it makes it difficult for us to attract and maintain high quality individuals to teach, period. And WTA people, please do not take this as an insult on you, because it's not intended that way. But I would argue quite simply that when your industry is competing with other industries for those same individuals coming out of college, if an individual can come out of college and make $100,000 or more to start in another industry, as opposed to becoming a teacher, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the vast majority of that talent is going somewhere else. So that limits the amount of talent that we can pull into a teaching position at Willits that starts out paying around in the low 40,000s. We need general fund money that allows us to pay teachers a much higher starting wage, have a much shorter path to the highest level on your pay scale, so that you have the opportunity to earn far more money throughout the course of your career, and also gives you a great deal more incentive to be as good a teacher as you can possibly be, given all the constraints it takes to be a teacher today. Now, with respect to $1 million that we extra, it's not enough to make the difference of what I'm talking about. Now, when we put in Measure I simply allows us to make sure that the money that we receive from the state and federal governments goes towards teachers and all that staff and all that support mechanism that makes your job bearable, is probably the best way I can put it. It allows us to focus that kind of money on you guys and providing the best education. Measure I allows us to take the money from Measure I and put it in places where we need it in order so we don't have to impact critical programs and teacher salaries and benefits and staff salaries and benefits through money from our general budget. I think Proposition 15 it can be a tiny part of that, but it's not enough, especially if those funds are having to be shared with a wide variety of other agencies. And so that's my take on it.
Okay, well, so
Here,
excuse me. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
What I
go
yeah,
ahead,
thank
Paula.
you. What I believe is that Prop 15, should it pass, would be more of a guarantee of funds every year. Granted, I wish the state would pay us way more than they do per person, per student that goes to school. But I believe with Proposition 15, you get sort of a guarantee of $1 million every year. Even if Measure I passes this time, you're going to do really well to get $600,000 for the first year, and you'll get that kind of rated up, if I understand the way I read it right, until the other places where the money is going to be diverted, in particular the charter schools, which I don't have a problem with, but I just mean that the amount of money will increase yearly as their amount decreases. And I really think that the burden, especially now, needs to start on the backs of the people who have been shirking that responsibility for the past 40 years, but in particular the last 20, where the hugest jumps in property values has been occurring, in particular when they treat corporations like people and don't tax them. The other part of my concern is that I really do think it would be great if our board and our teachers and all of the staff at the district could maybe take a part in passing out flyers or posting them or doing any number of things just to make it understood that all monies that come into the district are in the best interest of the district. And when they come from people who will feel it the least, because they are not people, they are businesses, then that's truly one of the very best ways to collect money, especially when it's a past owed bill or a past due bill.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I have a couple things
I
I'd like
would.
to.
Let's start with Mr.
I'll
Green.
let Dan go first.
Okay. I've been doing a little research on a few things. I have a few articles I'd like to talk about here. I'll start off with one from the Biz Journals from Sacramento. It's talking from a real estate perspective. And the highlight in it, it states that, and as any economist in common sense can attest, increased costs in the production of goods or provision of services results in higher consumer costs for the entire state population. That comes from if businesses have their taxes raised, they raise the prices on all consumers. And when you look at the businesses paying taxes, pretty much anything we use in the state will have a tax rise or a raise in rates to us. It goes from food to phones to electricities to anything that has a $3 million assets. I'll move on to the American Thinker. This one's dated from January 16, 2019. I went back a little bit on a few things. This is from the state controller, Betty Yee. California's personal income tax collections for the month of December missed by an estimated $3.45 billion. More alarming, personal income tax revenue plunged from 11 to $6 billion. Now, please keep in mind, remember the word personal income tax revenue, okay? Now, this is back before the pandemic started. Now, if you go to May 19 of 2020, this talks about the Golden State facing a $54 billion shortfall in the fiscal year beginning July 1st, okay? California projected that more than 70% of its general revenues, or $102 billion, would come from personal income taxes. The projected $54 billion shortfall that's coming soon. And then last year, the Public Policy Institute estimated that California would face revenue shortfalls averaging $22 billion a year for the next year's totaling $90 billion. Okay, then it goes off. The California projects that its expenses will go up by $7 billion. So as they're losing, they're moving stuff higher. If you go to the current, the Ballotpedia.org from California, it's a whole printout of the Proposition 15 tax on commercial and industrial properties. If you go back to the third page, the ballot title says increases funding for public schools, community colleges, and local governments by changing the tax assessment on industrial properties. It goes to say that it exempts from taxation changes residential properties, agricultural land, and owners of commercial and industrial properties with a combined value of $3 million or less. So this is a combined value of things. So if your combined value, even if your agriculture is more than $3 million, you will feel some of the impacts. You go to the second page, the state fiscal analyst estimated that upon full implementation, the ballot initiative would generate between 8 and 12 billion per year. That's what it'll generate in taxes. That money will be made up by consumers. Okay, so now this is from the ballot on how that money will be distributed once it's caught. Proposition 15 would create a process in the state constitution for distributing revenue from the revised tax on commercial and industrial properties. The ballot initiative would distribute the revenue to specific areas rather than the general fund. First, the revenue would be distributed to the state to supplement decreases in revenue from the state's personal income tax and corporation tax due to increased tax deductions. That's the $22 billion a year shortfall that they've already projected that they've lost from personal income taxes. Okay. Second, B, the counties to cover the cost of implementing the measure. That's the first bite of the pie. Second, 60% of the remaining funds would be distributed to local governments and special districts. That's 60% of what's left after the state takes all of their money to supplement the tax revenues. And 40% of that remaining would be distributed to local school districts and community college via LCAP. Revenue appropriated for education would be divided as follows. 11% of that 40% would go to community colleges, 89% for public schools, charter schools, and county offices of education would be splitting that. This is the part at the very end that gets me. There would also be a requirement that schools and colleges receive an annual minimum of $100 per student. Okay, now why would they throw that in there? That's kind of a question. So going by what the last presentation had, you're talking $1 million for the district. that comes down to $657 per pupil. If you go to the California Department of Education's website, it states that there's 1,037 districts in California. There's 6,163,001 students spread across 10,588 schools. So if we are to get $1 million for our district, $657 per pupil, if you take that number and extrapolate it so that every pupil in the state is treated evenly, times that by 6,163,000, you get $4,049,000,000. Okay, that is almost the minimum amount that they say they're going to take in from the tax increases. But you also have to understand that the first bite is the state to fill their revenues of $22 billion a year. The math doesn't seem to really add up. On top of that, you also have Assembly Bill 1253. Assembly Bill 1253 is to raise the income tax rate to 16.8% and add a 4% wealth tax on anybody who makes over $3 million. That alone, along with this added Prop 15 tax on businesses, is probably going to have a negative effect of driving businesses and people out of California, which will hurt the tax base even more. So I'm not quite sure the money pans out in Prop 16 the way it's worded on the ballot. It doesn't look like we're going to be getting that much money out of it. And going on to a relation on Measure I, if I does pass, all of the dollars do come to the school, and at least we know that that money comes here. But we're uncertain about any Prop 15 money because of all of those other entities that have the first bite at the pie. That's about all I got on it.
Thank you, Dan. That was very good.
I have something to say.
Go ahead, Jeannie.
Tessa knows at this point, unless something comes up that will change my mind, I don't plan on voting yes on Proposition 15. I have read quite a bit and tried to read across the spectrum in different media sources and that kind of thing, so I get an idea as to what is being said and try to extract truth. And what I've come to understand is that there's something called tax incidence, which refers to who bears the burden of a tax, which may be different from whom the tax is imposed on. And so we have to look at who's going to bear the burden of this tax. And I know that big businesses will most likely pass it on to the consumer. And I also, 3/4 of the small businesses in California do not own their own buildings and shops and office spaces. And most of these small businesses and shops have what's called a triple net lease, which basically means that their lease agreement with who owns the building that they're in says that they will pay any increase in taxes and insurance. So the cost of this increase in taxes for large businesses will get passed on to the small shops and store owners. And most shops and most small businesses in California are owned by minorities and women. And I know that it was said in that presentation that it was big businesses that were fighting this proposition. And it's my understanding that the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in California are against Proposition 15, and these are predominantly small businesses. So, And although agricultural land may not be taxed, buildings on that land can be taxed, like dairies, like processing plants for grapes or for pears in Mendocino County. They can be taxed through this proposition. And the proposition won't go into effect until 2022. So that's a couple years down the line. And I myself don't have a lot of faith in the state of California to follow through on what they say they're going to do. I know that they had the tax on the gas tax, which they said all the monies were going to go towards transportation. But at some point after voters passed that, based on that promise, the state found some way to take some of the money off the top and spend it for other pet projects. And California is great at having pet projects that I don't think are in really the best interests of a lot of the citizens in the state of California. The tax foundation rates California as the third worst business place in the United States. And I agree with Dan is that that this has the potential in this pandemic of driving businesses and driving more people out of California. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. So at this point, I plan on not voting for Proposition 15, but I plan on voting for both our local measures I and K. So
Thank you, Jeannie.
I know where that money will go.
Thank you, Jeannie. Tessa, you had some comments?
Yes, first of all, Disneyland is paying 1978 tax rates. And I am willing to make a bet with anybody here, a friendly wager, if you would, that Disneyland will not be leaving the state if Proposition 15 passes. That said, Disneyland is in Los Angeles County, and the Los Angeles Times recently posted their opinion piece on it, and I just would like to quote very briefly from it. There are two ways to look at this measure. The first is through a filter of fear. How can we even contemplate imposing a heavier tax burden on businesses at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has forced some to shut down, and when the fires, heat waves, and epic air pollution have caused people to wonder if it is time to flee California for good? The other way that one could, and we argue should, view Proposition 15 is through a lens of hope. At long last, there is a tangible fix in sight for one of California's most intractable problems, a wildly unfair and lopsided property tax system that for 4 decades, 40 years, has starved local governments of the revenue they need to provide services, and that has distorted the cost of buying a house, starting a business, to the detriment of young families and entrepreneurs. It does acknowledge it's not a complete fix, but a crucial first step to undo some of the damage wrought by Prop 13. And let's see, by no means is Proposition 15 perfect. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. All legislation would be written in truth and factuality, and everything would go exactly where they said it was. That Los Angeles Times doesn't say that. I threw that in there. It has unavoidable costs and will have unintended consequences. We would have preferred a more comprehensive package of reforms that created a fairer property tax system for everyone, not just businesses, and overhauled our entire system, including sales and income taxes, to build a modern and less volatile revenue stream for state and local governments. This is what Alex was referring to. Completely agree. Basically, by the end of the argument, the Los Angeles Times did endorse it. And I do like the idea. I'm definitely voting in favor of Measure I. The Willits Teachers Association has agreed to endorse Proposition 15. Having local control over the money is really helpful. We know where it's going. I agree with what you're saying. And my son just graduated from the teaching credential program this spring. And as a first-year teacher in Placer County, he's making almost as much as I am after 11 years of teaching. So there is a disconnect between, you know, what our top teachers are getting paid in other places versus what they're getting here. And I would argue that even if it takes 2 years before we see the money, and even if it's only $1 million, which by the way, it changes based on the tax base. Before the COVID crisis, we were predicted to have 1.4 million. So that amount has gone down as the tax rate has gone down, but it could also go up. So just keep in mind that $1 million is never going to hurt us. Like Mark said, we'll spend it, give it to us. And I think that's all. Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in? I have another couple of quick comments.
Yeah, Alex, I just have another comment. We've been paying increased prices for all sorts of things the last 40 years. And even through big businesses that, I mean, their rates didn't go up so drastically. I think the inflation rates are gonna do what they do because lots of big businesses never care. Well, lots of people, everyone never likes it when their buying power drops. So that shouldn't really, in my mind, be the deterrent, you know, and I just think I do have to agree. I certainly am voting for Prop 15, but I do agree a lot that the more money you can get into the district, the better. And if something is a guarantee, how I prefer it, as opposed to, well, this year the economy is really bad, so instead of 4%, we're going to take 2% or no percent this year, because that's all the language in Measure I also. So, you know, it's really handy that we get something that is concrete. And I truly do believe there is no business that's going to say, gee, I've been skating for 40 years and now that they want something from me, I think I'll move out of state. Because when they get out of state, they're going to find a tax rate that's way greater than even what they're going to be stuck for now. So I really think those parts are things to calm down on. Okay.
I appreciate all the comments. I especially appreciate how well Dan put together his presentation with respect to essentially what I would argue is the factual information read directly from the bill itself. The thing, it is interesting that the state will take the first slice of that pie. They will guarantee $100 per student across the 6 million students in the state. I get that, and then they'll backfill whatever their deficits are with the lion's share of that money until those deficits are backfilled. But also don't forget this: as long as the state has a significant deficit, we're going to be in deferrals or budget cuts back to schools, because the states are, Proposition 111 allows the state to reduce the amount of money that they're going to pay the school districts based on the lack of funds that they have. So one way or another, we got to find a way to heal both the state's budgets and our own. Proposition 13 may not be the best answer, but it's what's on the table today. And hopefully it does something to all of our benefits, assuming it passes. I know that there's significant opposition to it. And like the last one that was similar to it on the last election cycle, but that did not pass, there's a real possibility that Proposition 15 won't survive this either. Anybody else? Okay, thank you for the presentation on Proposition 13 WTA. We'll move on to the action section of the agenda. We have item A, approval of the learning continuity attendance plan, the new version of LCAP for 2021. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, we had lots of input, 1.7 million of input based on the approximate numbers I put together, which is more than the funding. But I want to reiterate is that if you read through the plan, you're going to see multiple references to we're going to use all of the funds for the district that we have to try and achieve those. I'll just give you some really easy examples. Professional development for teachers, we're still going to get title money. So whether it comes from this fund or the title, the real issue comes down to timing. We're going to make sure we spend that 1.4 million before December. Then we'll use whatever funds we have remaining to continue to do that. One of the issues, for example, we have an additional teacher at Blosser. We're talking about family liaisons for our Hispanic families. We want to keep doing that after January or after December. One of the ways we'll do that is the SSR funds. So we're going to use all the funds we have to try and maintain all of those stakeholder requests. That's why when we did it, I didn't say, well, say we're out of money, we got to take something out. I allowed all the input and put all those in there because it's not our only funding source. What I wanted to get was all the needs we could come up with and then figure out how we're going to fund those, what the priorities are, especially with one-time money that has to be done by December. What are we going to use from December on for those things we want to keep and don't fit into the program? So there's tons of input. The plan's already been looked over by the county. The county was fairly pleased with what they saw. They're waiting on a board approval. I let them have a preview of it because they're on a time frame too, and we waited till the very end of the month. So I just
Okay.
want to leave it at that.
Mark, we talked a little bit today about the types of funds that make up that 1.4 as opposed to the 1.8 million that was disputed at some point. Can you give us a brief overview of how that worked?
Yeah, there are only 3 funds that are in there. The one fund that was also brought into the conversation was the ESSR funds. Those funds actually go for the rest of they go for the whole school year. They are not part of the learning continuity plan. But in Willits, 75% of our kids are unduplicated. So you can take any single fund in our district you want, from LCAP, supplemental concentration, fund balance, title, everywhere. We're spending money on unduplicated students. We don't have any problem meeting the threshold that we're required for unduplicated spending. But the ESSR, I look at that as the fund that's going to help us back up what we get done between now and December. The things we need to maintain ongoing for the rest of the year, the ESSR funds can back that up because they can go for the rest of the year. Because I don't want to have to not have an additional teacher at Blosser. I want to have liaisons that go all year long. There's going to be a lot of those things we want to keep. And on one-time funding we have to spend by December, we can't do that. So I view ESSER that got talked about the same way as I view all our other funds.
So that ESSER fund was never part of the LCAP of the discussion in the first place. It wasn't required to be.
Correct. It wasn't required to be. I literally could have brought in any fund and thrown it into the mix and said, let's talk about this fund too. I mean, like I said, all our funds go to everything.
And so just to clarify, in terms of the funding sources and sort of mechanisms for those, the ESSER was something that was done completely separate from the learning loss mitigation funds. It was the ESSER funds sort of fall under the same umbrella, for instance, as our Title I funds. There are federal funds that were designated to us prior to the learning loss mitigation funds being allocated. Then the California received federal funding and also supplemented with some other state funding and passed that through to schools in the form of the learning loss mitigation funds. And with that, created the requirement to do the learning continuity and attendance plan in lieu of our normal LCAP plan.
Right.
So they kind of came from two different sources at two different times, and the ESSER funds are separate. The ESSER funds also are, as Mark mentioned, have a longer timeline and will allow us to bridge the gap on some of these things we're trying to put into place, which the learning loss funds really limited us having the December deadline.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have a motion to approve item A, approval of learning continuity attendance plan?
Approve the plan.
That was from Mr. Chavez. Do we have a second?
I second.
So Jeannie seconds. Is there any further discussion with respect to the plan? I'd like to point out that this is just a plan. It's not set in concrete. Adjustments will be made as we move forward, I'm sure. There'll be areas in the plan where we don't spend as much as we thought we would. There'll also, I'm sure, be areas in the plan where we will need to spend more than we expect. So some of those funds will get, or some of those dollar amounts will change. If at some point you identify something, anybody in the audience identifies something in the plan that could be better, please make your position known, and I'm sure that it'll get it'll at the very least get an opportunity to get your voice heard, and then we'll hopefully move forward from there. So,
Well,
We're not
Alex,
sending the dime back. That I can
Pardon?
tell you.
okay, well, so that's good that you said that, because I just, I've looked this over, and it has a liaison for Spanish speakers, which I sort of talked with Mark about and thought was a really brilliant plan. But it's like marked for $3,000. And then it has this provide dinner for students, and I'm not quite sure which students where, but it's $60,000. And so I'm sort of thinking maybe that's a typo or a twist, but it just sounds like we might not need to take them to the coast or the broiler or anything, and maybe we could pay more for aides or someone to be liaisons.
Well, Paula, that was one of the major changes we talked about, and I got that from administrators and talking to other districts.
Uh-huh.
That's one of those funds that I believe you're going to see at it's at our next board meeting, I believe, isn't it, Nikki? That you're going to see a job description that's going to actually be $115,000 for 2 people.
Yeah, I believe that will be on the October. So I think that's kind of a perfect illustration of what Alex was saying, which is that, it's much like the LCAP. We put this in place, we talk about the measures we're trying to accomplish, and the practical application or implementation of those things evolve. And so this is one of those cases where the initial concept for that was something smaller. And then as you guys engaged in discussion about this, it evolved into something bigger. And we do expect the expense for that to be much higher than what's listed in the current plan.
And
Meaning the $3,000, not the 60.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Well, a lot of the EL services like translations and all that, that's going to be part of these job descriptions.
Okay,
So it would
so
kind
the
of
one,
roll some of those other expenses
Yeah, we're going to roll
under
those
that
expenses
umbrella.
to it. But remember, we can only pay somebody until the end of December. So
okay.
those positions, although they'll cost a lot more for the second half of the year with benefits and all that, you have to fund that somewhere different than this.
Okay, because you're not.
So
I'm sorry.
you'll see when we look at the approval for that job description at the next meeting, you'll see that it's listed as sort of a multi-funded position, because the first part of the year would be funded from this source. The second part of the year, we would need to fund perhaps from the ESSER or other funds that we have.
Okay, but if you're thinking of 115,000 a year, it may be. are you still considering 2 people? Are you considering certificated as opposed to classified?
No,
Or are you thinking about 4 or 5 people could do those various jobs? I mean, that amount of money is a good deal of money if we're not talking full-time beginning teachers or something.
That
Well,
amount actually covers 2 full-time positions.
Right, no, I know, I heard that.
classified, not
But that still comes to 58 grand a piece, basically.
Well, that's fully inclusive of all
All the
statutory
benefits, et cetera, but that's,
welfare.
even
And
then
it's
you're down to
probably-
40.
Yeah, it's probably also a bit of an overstatement for current year, because when we look at it, we look at if you have the position, because if it goes forward, we need to know what a total annual cost is. But we know
Right.
that it would have a late start. There would be several months where we wouldn't pay health benefits and such. So current year, we'd see that expense perhaps be a little less, but that's like for a full year of 2 full-time positions.
And Paula, we had talked before, we're looking at a K-5 person and a 612.
Yeah,
They're classified. We met with CSEA and worked out a job description and a pay scale. And so that's where that number comes from. But it's going to take the place of a lot of these EL services that are kind of bandaged together here.
oh,
And the really
Okay.
important thing is we need a go-to for our Spanish-speaking parents.
right, that's true. That's
And
true.
before we even talk about the EL instruction in the room, we got to get them into our building, comfortable with us, and having a go-to to communicate with. So this is even pre-instruction issues that we're dealing with.
Okay. And then my last one is the newcomer class based on 1 period a day, that is based on 1 period a day. Is that the amount, like a teacher would just pull an extra period or something? Is that what you're thinking?
That's
It's like
the
a-
dollar figure I used.
Yeah. Well,
But-
that's about what it's rated for 1 period a day.
Yeah,
I think it's about 7 grand, but still.
yeah, but
Oh, okay.
I use that as my dollar figure as a benchmark.
Uh-huh.
And it could be from a multitude of different sources. It comes down to a simple thing. Is this a 4-credit class for kids? And if it is, then it's a certified teacher.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not, it could be from a classified person, but it depends on where you're at. The high school is more concerned about it being credit-based than anybody else because you need credits to graduate at the high school.
Right.
So, but that's the dollar figure I used. But the newcomers class really right now is only involving middle school and high school kids. That's the only place we have it.
Oh, okay.
If we
Okay.
had elementary students, we'd have to figure out what we're going to do because that's a different animal all into itself.
Yeah. No techniques and well, anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Don.
So you were mentioning that the plan might evolve a bit. And so I was just curious, as it does, are you gonna re-meet with your committee? Do you have to like kind of reapprove it or discuss how it's evolving, or is it just what it is?
Well, it's kind of what it is because
I
this
would
is a short time frame.
I would expect any significant changes to be brought back to the board. Now, what's significant? That's something I think we can negotiate out with the superintendent. But I would argue that that whole list of items that already make up that plan, I would argue that the superintendent, if one of those items is more expensive and one of those items is another one's less expensive, he can move money around in those categories pretty much at will. However, if he's going to start adding a significant category, if you will, in other words, a significant change to the plan, I would expect at the very least that the board has an opportunity to weigh in on it.
Yeah. And there are places, for example, a job description. That's an obvious example. Next time we're going to talk about that comes directly from the meeting with these people and funding. So.
Once again, I want to say this board at least this board member welcomes input from all places. And I would expect that the administration at least gives everybody their opportunity to have their voice heard. That doesn't mean that the administration has to take everybody's suggestion and build it into the plan. He still has to deal with the budgetary portions of it, and still someone has to make the decision as to whether or not it is in the idea fits in with the plan in general in the first place. So somebody has to make that call. We hire the superintendent to make that call. But again, I really do appreciate everybody in the process and getting your voices heard.
Is there any more time for talk or discussion?
I missed that. I'm sorry.
This is Brian Bowles under Lisa Bowles' iPad.
Can you turn your mic down a little bit? It's super loud.
Mic sucks.
Sure. It's a district computer, so I apologize. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little better.
Is that any better? Is that any better?
Yeah, it's a little better.
Go ahead, Brian.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You have to turn the volume up slightly.
How about that?
That's better.
So I find it ironic that we talked about a $3,000 item on the agenda that you're about to pass, and within the conversation of 5, maybe 4 minutes, it went from 3,000 to 115,000. And it seems like we should have a little bit better understanding of the items in the budget that we're about to pass. And if we can know on the spot that it's not really 3,000, like it's being proposed to our board, but 115,000, and we have as many things that are on that list as there are, and as hard as it is to understand how they're actually being spent, we might want to have a lot more meetings to make sure that the money is being spent correctly. Because right now we're about to pass something that has a $112,000 difference in realities just on 4 minutes of conversation.
So Brian, that's why it was already planned that it's coming at the next board meeting. It is coming for board approval as a separate item.
And so we can expect the numbers to be more realistic in the next board meeting?
Well, I don't think there's any way to know exactly how every single item on this plan will play out. It's impossible to know until they're happening. And that's why as those changes happen, we address them with the board. I mean, we're working on a very short time period. We have to do our best estimates that we know in the moment and work on it going forward. There's really no other alternative.
Let me also make sure we understand. It didn't go from 3 to 115. We're using half of the funding is coming from this document, only half. So if you want to use the whatever $55,000 number, that's fine, but that's where it's coming from. It's not all coming from this fund.
No, I understand that. My point is we have it listed at $3,000, and let's use your 55,000. It went from 3 to 55,000, and people at this meeting knew that number. Yet we're going to have a vote on it tonight. I just find it very unique and strange that we can jump from 3,000 to 55 if you want, or 3,000 to 115, and then also none of the board members even know about the concept of these liaisons and that there'll be $115,000. In fact, no one else in the committee, I think, knows that that's the plan. So I would like a little more transparency, I guess, is what I'm requesting.
Brian, I would say that I think part of this process, I think as we've all identified, is the engagement, getting the feedback and trying to incorporate that. And I believe these positions were a result of that type of engagement and that type of feedback. And so, trying to incorporate those things as they happen. And the other thing I would say in terms of the money, I don't have, the totals in front of me because the intention was to bring it at the October meeting for the final numbers. But I believe that there are several other items in this list which would be covered under these positions. So the responsibilities would be handled by these positions. So in terms of when we look at the comparison of expenditures, it's not just the 3,000. I believe there are some other items on the list which would sort of be checked off and accomplished by these positions as well. And we can, at the October meeting, certainly provide an exact analysis of how many items in the list are comprised within these job descriptions. If that makes sense?
It does, and I guess I would ask that that new list is available earlier than a day or two before the board meeting, so that people could weigh in and truly understand it, including the board members, so that they have a grasp of where that money is being spent and be as educated as they can be with as much time to understand it as possible.
Well, absolutely, and I would say in terms of trying to prepare for this, the state has just given us a tremendously short timeline to work on. We're required to have this approved by September 30th. And typically when we do our LCAP plans, we have the entire year to develop and work on it and do this engagement process. So it's just an extremely abbreviated timeline to try to accomplish.
Well, we did have it since March, actually. Right? So it seems like that, but we've asked to start the process much earlier, and we're told that we just need to get school started first. And then the day after school started, boom, now all of a sudden it's on like Donkey Kong. And so
maybe I'm misunderstanding, but my understanding was this was part of the adopted state budget in June.
It was. We also didn't have a conversation about teacher laptops being $35,000 more either. But again, I went with a much better model, but.
I didn't hear that, Mark. Can you restate that?
We didn't have a conversation about teacher laptops being $35,000 more either. We didn't have a conversation that the doc cams became an issue where they're $200 a piece for every teacher. So,
and we should have that conversation. I totally agree. That should be a conversation that everybody's a part of.
No,
that's my point. Is we all need to understand that these things have changed and that we have to have a conversation about it.
Well,
and so that we can get input.
Input fine.
Education of where the money's been spent.
Well,
so just to clarify, that the purpose of the planning and the engagement process is to help identify needs throughout the district. And so that's really the process of trying to get everybody to provide what you're experiencing, what you're seeing on your end of things, and to help make sure that we're identifying all of the issues that need to be addressed with the funds. But the engagement process, I don't believe, is intended by the state to be a dollar for dollar approval process.
That I would agree with you. But I do think that they believe that the stakeholders will understand and have an understanding of the budget so they can prioritize correctly. Without money, I buy dog food or my kids' food, and I don't know how much kids' food I have in the fridge, I'm not a very good parent. So I would find out how much food is in the fridge before I buy the dog food. That's how you prioritize things. You got to know how much you've spent already or how much you have to spend. And I don't believe that anybody besides maybe a select few had any kind of interest or any kind of knowledge of our budgetary facts going into the input that was allowed to be given to the district.
And again, I'm going to do my role, the things I need to do to move the district forward, and spending the funds and taking care of priorities is that issue. And what you want is to be part of controlling the budget and knowing it. And
no, I want you to be more proactive about soliciting the correct kind of input that has been given by the state as a directive to you. And I don't think that you've done that.
Can I jump in and clarify some things? So I just had a question. Because I was part of the committee And so I wanted to clarify the $3,000 or whatever's on the list that we're discussing right now. Where is it in this packet? The page number. I understand there's a whole list on the back, or if you want to tell me where I can find it on the back 2 pages of what we discussed in our committee. So Mark, what was the line item in the back that we're discussing that's now moving to $115,000?
Let's go over this again. It's not moving to 115, okay?
Or the 55, I'm sorry, I apologize. $55,000 for this time, and then probably using the ESSER funds a later time to fill in the other part for the rest of the year. So where is the line item?
There's a liaison for Spanish speakers. There's additional bilingual tech support. There is multiple places in here where we talk about EL students, a Spanish camp for bilinguals. Multiple places in here refer to dealing with EL students.
So is it different than the 2 paid positions for EL teachers, the 4th one from the bottom for $90,000?
Yes, teachers are teachers. They're not
Okay.
liaisons.
Okay, I'm just clarifying.
Yep.
So what you're saying is all of these, and I'm trying to find them here, because this was not
some on,
discussed.
Amy, some are on page 10 and some are on page 11.
Yeah, and they may do the beginners class.
Yeah, well.
Well, that was a, I guess they could do it online for middle school, one class, okay.
There's translation services for $6,000.
So they would be available to translate during, during teacher meetings or when teachers would be teaching classes that have a newcomer. They would
It's
do
all
that.
in their job description that we put together.
Yeah, we'd have to really look at the job description, but it should include all sorts of things that are just second language learner specific, okay, so that there is a way to deal with that. What I brought up was that there was a line item in the budget that said 60 grand to take the kids to dinner, you know, and it just kind of concerned me that that was an odd number when we're talking about people working for only $3,000. And that's what sort of turned the whole conversation into what it's kind of turned into. And that's when it was being explained that, okay, well, some of those numbers are not accurate. I do have to agree that the more meetings we have, well, I personally believe in meetings a lot because they keep communication open and clear. But the more that we have on making everything that's spent or dealt with open, well, the better. And for my way of thinking, because then when you go to explain what goes on, you truly are explaining what you know to be true, as opposed to what you think you heard that ends up being entirely different than what people who were talking meant for you to understand. Okay, so that's, but it's just, yeah, I'm sorry.
I came up with $29,000 just quickly breezing through the list of things the liaisons are going to do.
Well, that's good. And so then it will be really important that the committee knows what they're looking for and has an ability to determine whether or not those skills exist in the people they're looking at.
Exactly.
And so I did add up the amounts. And so when I added up the amounts in the packet, not the back spreadsheet, I didn't add all those up. I added up what was typed into the LCAP template. And that was $1,554,000. And the last, when we spoke at our committee, it was it was 1,723,000. So I know we went over before, so some things were taken off in the meantime, but then we added an extra $40-some thousand or $50,000. So I'm just wondering if it's something that we need, of course, the committee is going to be excited to help out the students, but and the staff. But I would like to see that there is explanation on what monies were spent and how much there was a change, or just a running record of what's being paid for through this funding. Because if we do have extra funds, then there's always the need for more things for our students or more staff, or there's always a need. But so how can we come together in the next meeting or meet again for the committee to discuss what has been done so far? Maybe like every 4 weeks we meet, or every 3 weeks, depending on what we're buying, and say, this is what we've done with the money. I don't know if that's too much to ask, but I think with things changing so rapidly, I think it would be a great thing to be transparent and honest and come together. I don't know. I'm not saying you're not honest. I'm saying that we need to know the numbers.
Okay,
So that
well, let's say this. There aren't going to be more committee meetings. I can put out more information, but to get all these things done before December is going to be a monumental task. And so my office staff and admin are going to be working really hard to get this stuff in place. So the issue comes down to very simple. I never said in a committee meeting, oh, we don't have enough money, let's not add that, or we got to subtract anything. I intentionally wanted all the input, which I thought I got. And when I put it in here, it came up to more than what we had, because we're going to use all the funds we have to accomplish these goals. And these goals may not turn out exactly like you had hoped, but they also have to be worked in the confines of contracts, budgets, timing, unions, and existing staff, and all kinds of other issues. This isn't fund money. This is money in our budget that we budgeted for to run the district this year. This isn't additional that we're going to be able to do fun things that we want to do with it. So people need to be really clear. This is already budgeted money that we're trying to expend to take care of needs. Again, LCAP is $1 million more than this every year, which you folks have pretty much chose not to participate in, and it has exactly the same guidelines and rules.
So to be clear, no one has chose not to participate in that. We have yet to create site meetings and a lot of other things, and we have asked specifically since May for collaboration with you in this district. And so for you to say that we have not been on board or are interested in being part of the LCAP is a lie.
Yeah, okay.
I think he was referring to previous LCAPs, not the specific.
Yeah, we have site people
LCAP.
that have been elected to go to those meetings. So we find one per site, and they're the people that go. And then if we want to join in to find out, we can. But there is a delegated person at the site for the site council to deal in the LCAP. But I will like to join that. I would like to join that in the future. Yeah, now that I know it's needed, we need more people involved, then I would join that.
So are we at a point where we can, do we have a motion on the table for this? I'm sorry, do we have a motion?
Yes, isn't that Robert and Jeannie did that?
Is there any further discussion? Okay, call for the vote. All in favor of approval of the learning continuity attendance plan for 2021 or 2020/2021? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Item B, approval of the GAN limit resolution.
So I don't know if you guys want, I can try and project the GAN report up onto the screen. It is part of the document that was emailed out within the unaudited actuals packet. Just as a, do you guys, should we try to get it up on the screen? Or are we good with the packets?
I'm good with the packet. I just have to find it.
Okay.
Explain to them, Nikki, what the GAN limit is.
Sure. So the GAN limit is something that was put in place at the state level many decades ago, and it was intended as a way to, I guess, mitigate uncontrolled increases to government spending. So not education specific, all types of government spending. And it requires that districts during their closing of their books do this report of our spending and make sure that we're not exceeding this calculated limit. Because of the impact of inflation and the other economic factors, it's really not relevant anymore and hasn't been for a very long time. You know, districts ultimately never do, and agencies generally don't surpass this GAN limit. And so really what it ends up being is this formalized process that we do part of our closing. It gets reported to the state, and then the state rolls that into their statewide calculation. And that's really all that it is.
Okay. It is a resolution. Do we have a motion to approve the GAN limit resolution?
I move that we approve it.
I second.
Okay. I believe this is largely a formality, but any further discussion on item B? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote, and it is a resolution, so it'll be a roll call vote. We'll start with Jeannie.
You're muted, Jean.
Aye.
Mr. Chavez?
Aye.
Mr. Colvig?
Aye.
And Paula?
Aye.
And for myself, aye. And move on to item C, Charlie. Approval of the unaudited actuals report for 2019-20. Nikki, you're back on.
All right. Mark, do you want to let me do a screen share on this one?
Sure. I gotta figure out how to pass it to you.
While you do that, can I ask you a question, Nikki, please?
Sure.
There's almost every one of these accounts has a thing called prepaid expenses, or prepaid, oops, wrong page, hold on. They're called, yeah, prepaid expenditures. And what I notice is it's like $16,276 listed over and over and over again. And so I figure it's the same money. I'm not 100% positive, but it seems to be. The only thing is not every fund has a prepaid expenditures, but what are those?
So we actually currently only have one prepaid expenditure on the books, and we've been carrying it for a couple of years now. And that was that we purchased a new ag truck several years ago. The cash payment took place, but because we were using some particular ag funding that allows us to expense it over time. So essentially we have that sitting there, and each year we expense a few $1,000s against the ag funding, and it will eventually whittle that prepaid asset down to zero. So it's just a way for us to use several years worth of funding to have purchased that truck up front without having to do a loan.
Okay, so that means the balance is 16,278 or whatever it is, right? It's not that you're spending that every year. Oh, okay.
Correct. That's the end of the year balance. And what we've been doing is about $5,000 per year of
okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We purchased
when
the truck and let them repay it over time.
Right.
Okay. Because some of these numbers I see over and over again, and I just wasn't, I mean, first off, thank you very much, Nikki, that the budget came up so that I could have I mean, generally I get it 5 minutes before the meeting. It makes me crazy. I don't have time to look at it at all. But today I had all day, and so it was a really good thing. It's just I ended up with more questions because I got to study it better. And so thanks.
problem.
There are
Nikki, you
things that I
should be
didn't
able to
get.
share now. You should be able to show your.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, are you guys seeing it?
Yes.
All right, so the first thing I just want to do, unless there's any major questions, about the first page, is I usually actually jump down here to the second page because I think that most of us are interested always in looking at what the net increase or decrease in the fund balance ended up to be. And so if you look at the first column there as the unrestricted side of the budget, and we had a small surplus as we closed of $133,000. And I just wanted to do a quick recap of where we were earlier in the year compared to where we ended. So we stayed very closely on track as we finished the year. Fortunately, I think we didn't have a lot of unexpected issues for the 1920. I mean, we know there was lots of unexpected issues for 2021, but between our second interim and now, not too many dramatic changes here. So at second interim, we were projecting that number to be about 73,000. Estimated actuals, 98,000. So really very, very little change, on track with where we expected to be. I would say there's a couple of things of note for this year that if you're looking at page 1, things that may jump out would be, for instance, in the expenditures, the capital outlay for 1920 was fairly significant, and that was due to vehicle purchases. We were very fortunate to receive several grants. So we got, I believe, 2 new buses, some vans, trying to think if there were any other. Those are the ones that are coming to mind, and certainly the buses are the largest piece of that. So you'll see that when you look at revenue, those were one-time revenues, and then as well one-time expenditures in the capital outlay that kind of, skew if you are looking year over year. As we go into next year, I do want to point out that the budget side that you're looking at really is essentially the budget that was approved in August. So that's what's represented here. There were some extremely minor changes that I had to do just to incorporate some ending fund balances once they were, certain here in the unaudited actuals. But not a lot of changes. However, we know there's changes that are occurring as we implement the plan that we just talked about. And so those will all be things we look at first interim. But I did just want to point out, this is not the budget, the June budget. This is the August revision that we looked at. So it incorporates the actual state adopted revenue as opposed to what we had previously estimated, which was based on the governor's May revision.
Okay. So we end up closing out the books a little bit to the good.
Yeah, essentially for a budget this size, this is just a balanced budget. I think, it's a very small percentage of our overall budget. And this is where I would like to be more often. Unfortunately, I think in some past years had to do some deficit spending in order to deal with particular issues or, build programs and such, but certainly not being in a structural deficit would always be the hope.
And just to be 100% transparent to our WTA folks here, we had a massive deficit back December and January that we turned into a plus. next year, we're going to be one of the few districts in the county not deficit spending. And that's not an accident. That was done with no layoffs and putting contracts into place and retaining all our staff and paying step and column increases. So,
yes, that's a really good point because, you know, as we talked about for the 1920, if you were to sort of track those balances for 1920, for 2021, at second interim, we were projecting the 2021 year to be deficit 540,000. And that was so second interim, that was pre-COVID, right? So that was like before anything really got crazy. That was just where we were at based on the staffing levels, the current structure of our programs. And, you know, a $500,000 deficit, I would say would not be ideal. And that was something that we knew we needed to work on. At the June adoption, which incorporated the estimation of the governor's budget cuts, we were projecting a deficit of 855,000. And so really the estimated reductions that we incorporated into that budget were well over $1 million. And we managed at that time to only increase the deficit by 300,000. And so at that time, we were already trying to bring that structural deficit back into alignment. That put us in slightly better shape so that when the governor did approve, or not the governor, I should say, the Senate ultimately, and the governor did approve their final budget, which did not incorporate the budget cuts, that puts us here in this position of the being in alignment for 2021 and having the surplus 223, which ultimately, again, we talked the last meeting, we are getting the revenue, but on a very deferred schedule. And so we are very likely to run into some cash flow issues this year. So it was imperative that we did that budget work. I believe if we had not taken action to bring that in line, in terms of cash flow, we would have been in a very bad way for this year.
and the 200,000 is 1% of our budget. I would wager none of us are going to get within 1% of your home budget at the end of the year. And the reality is we think we're going to be able to weather the deferments. Our biggest issue going into deferments starting in January is not total revenue, it's cash flow.
Yeah. And the difficulty is that if we are unable to avoid borrowing, for districts that end up in a borrowing scenario, the problem is that it becomes really this hamster wheel. For as many years as the state budget is in crisis and is not able to catch their payments back up to us, if we start going into borrowing mode in order to meet our payroll and our utilities obligations and such, then once you get into that mode, you don't really get back out of it until they catch up on their deferments, because you are in a mode now where once you get funds, you're paying back those debts or those anticipation notes, and you're just sort of stuck in that cycle. So we'll be watching that cash flow throughout this year, but it's going to be close at the very least.
Thank you, Nikki.
Well, before you go, can I ask you some questions?
Certainly.
On the bottom of page 2, if you keep on scrolling, and you get down closer to the bottom and it says assigned other assignments, and there's nothing, and then all of a sudden in the next year there ends up being $500 and nearly $50,000, and at the end of it it says new. So what is other assignments, and why? I mean, while you do that, I also need to know why it and the one below it, the Reserve for Economic Uncertainties, is all blanked out until the following year. And then, okay, we have about what we used to have, of almost $3 million, and it's called new. I don't understand. I mean, I understand all the negative percentages and the plus percentages throughout that column, but new means what?
So that is an oversight in terms of the form input. So this software that we use to report to the state is not the software we use for our daily management of our finances. And so what happens when it comes to a reporting period, we have to roll in from our daily software into this state reporting software. And when I do that, it pulls from certain places in my software. And so essentially what's happened here is that for 2021, it pulls from where I have budgeted. And when I'm closing, it does not pull from that. And I should have gone in and done a manual adjustment to list that amount. Now, I will say in terms of the reserve for economic uncertainty, I mean, I guess it's still helpful to look at what that is in terms of reflecting against your budget for the year. But once you've made it through the year, your reserve for economic uncertainty is somewhat moot, right? Because that is a percentage that you're setting aside for these economic uncertainties that's dictated by the state. And when you're closing, you're already done with the year. So you have no uncertainties left for that year. And so it's not a required thing for me to enter there. However, it is probably still useful and should have been entered so that we can see a comparison between the 2 years. And the assignments, generally that is areas within the budget that we have fund balance, but they are for somewhat specific purposes. So they are in the unrestricted side of the budget, but they are assigned for specific uses. So that tends to be, for instance, our supplemental concentration grant. It helps it, have its own identity because it's intended at the state level that we use those funds specific to what we're listing in our LCAP. It also can incorporate if we have any balance in our MAW funds or our lottery funds. So that being zero is an oversight, that is an error, and it is not actually zero in our budget. It doesn't change the actual fund balance. It's just one of the components of the fund balance. And I definitely can get that emailed out to you what that number is.
Okay, because that's kind of similar when you get down on the next page to K. It talks about their fund equity, and the ending fund balance in June was like $232,000 nearly. And it came from restricted and unrestricted, but I would figure that it was spent, or if not, then I don't understand how it was able to sit in there for so long,
Maybe I'm not sure on that question. Can you restate that question one more time, please?
Sure. On the bottom of page, I guess it's 3, it's the next one.
Okay.
On letter K, it's called a fund equity, and its ending balance is way greater than the rest. It says it must agree. Yeah, there it is on the very bottom, $4,231. No, $4,231,088.38. And that just, none of those carry over, and I'm not quite sure why. I mean, this whole section right there is empty.
Right.
But
So this section, this is specific to closing. This level of detail of breaking down the current asset structure. This is something that we don't do as part of our budget projection process. It's just a part of our closing process. And then the auditors are able to use it for various audit requirements and their financial statements that they use in the audit. So there never is anything under the budget section for this component.
Oh, okay. Well, so does that apply to other sections on here? I mean, there's an English learner part, Title III, and it talks about 36, 37, nearly $1,000, and it's projected for the following year to drop down to like $2,000. So that sort of, I mean,
Do you have a page number?
oh yeah, it's like 5 or whatever. It's the one 2 doors down, 2 pages over.
Okay, let's see if I can find that.
What caught my eye, basically, yes,
So
sort of
is it
what,
this
there
one?
it is. Yeah, and
Right.
see at the very first line, things like that caught my eye a lot. There's another one when it says, I think that's No Child Left Behind, but one never knows, and that every student succeeds. Okay, it says they started with $67,500, but then next year it's imagined that 234,000, almost 235,000 is going to, be spent on making sure no child is left behind. Now, I don't guess you're going to send me a paper that says that means we spend it on 3 teachers and this and that and the other, these materials, but such a huge difference. Well, it just sort of surprises me. And as you stay on this page, there's a Federal Reserve amount of money that goes from $112,000. Stop or you'll erase yourself. There, whoops, you just passed you. You have to go down one. There it is. See that? It says total federal revenue. Well, it just jumps. It's nearly, well, it is. It's over doubled. Do you sort of see it? It's past all that cluster of numbers.
Yes. And so what we're looking at here, so whereas the section above where we were talking about the fund balance, components of fund balance, this is actually a breakdown of our actual revenues coming in. And so, so what we're looking at here is obviously for 1920, the actual revenues that we recognized, and then for next year, what we're projecting. And some of why we see big differences, particularly within the federal funding, is that with many of our funds, state funds, when we're funding, and if we don't use it all, it sits there as fund balance. So we recognize the full amount of money that they gave us, even if we didn't spend the full amount, and perhaps we will spend it in a future year. And that's obviously how we end up in our unrestricted with having all of that, our fund balance that sits there. With federal funding, they have a different accounting principle that we have to go by, which is called deferred revenue. And what it means is that we may not recognize the revenue on our books until we've spent it. So although they've allocated a certain amount, if you spend under that amount, you still only recognize the amount of revenue based on how much you spent. And so you'll see a lot more fluctuations with the federal funds, because if we have carryover, so to speak, it's not listed as fund balance and then carried over. It is just shown as a higher amount of revenue in the following year when we anticipate the use of those funds. And so when we look at this, I think that we've talked about this before, that the Title III, it previously was funding part of an EL position.
Right, and now it
is
isn't.
EL position right now, and so for next year, as of right now, until if something changes, we don't have a position coded to that. So there's very little anticipated expenditure. Therefore, that means we can only recognize a little bit of the revenue. So there may be, in fact, more revenue that we're anticipating we could get or have access to. We're not allowed to show it on the books because of the federal accounting requirements. And so one of the other ones that we are seeing has to do with this big chunk where you were talking about it goes from the 67 to the 234. Why we're seeing a really big swing there is that the federal funds for the one-time funds are incorporated in this long list of resources here where it says like 30/20, 30/40. Those are all of the resources where we're holding the one-time funds, and we did show in our 2021 budget an anticipation of spending them, and therefore an anticipation of recognizing the revenues.
Okay, and
that-
so because I thought I understood that, that's what really made it so, I mean, I understand that if I look at career and technical ed staying the same because you figure, okay, I got this much money and I'm going to spend it. The No Child Left Behind, I got a bunch of money, but I didn't spend it all, so I carried it over. But I didn't understand on the English language learner why it went from we had a chunk and now we're not going to have any. Okay.
Right.
And that's sort
so
of what
that,
prompted that.
yeah, it's just because we don't currently have that position funded to that. We don't currently have that in the budget. What I look at for this is that, you know, if we're averaging in the 30s of the allocation per year, if in the year, like if in 21, 22, we were to put in place something, we would have next year's or this year's allocation as well as next year's combined to put towards something. So the money doesn't go, it hasn't gone away. We still have access to the allocation in 2021. We just don't currently have a position budgeted there as of right now.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
we do, in terms of the way the federal allocations happened, I am anticipating a fairly equivalent amount of allocation in 2021 as what we got in 1920.
And that
And that's-
amount wouldn't even fund 35% of a teacher,
No, yeah, it's not gonna.
Right.
a
Right,
third of a
anything,
teacher
but-
maybe.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought it was an 8 or something. But then when it dropped to $2,000, I thought it's gonna buy pencils maybe and paper. But then what?
Right. And so
only have a
really like what we
position.
have budgeted in Title III for 2021 currently is really like PD for our EL coordinators, things related to managing the assessment process and such.
Uh-huh.
That's what that small 2,000, you know, we have a little bit budgeted there for those types of activities.
And Paula, one of the travesties in funding is that they ought to treat EL students like special ed students get to be treated. And
Well, funding especially.
yeah, they don't.
No.
That's all we get for EL, and it's always an add-on. It's not a mandated, but it's, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I would be cautious in using that analogy only because I think we've reached a point with school funding and special education funding where
Yeah.
we're being underfunded for special education, which
Yeah.
I don't think is our goal
True.
for EL students per se, but
Yeah. But
yes.
similar, they're not even funded even remotely similar to special ed.
No,
Well,
and yet that is a special
that's-
need until you're, you know,
that is true.
more
Although
skilled.
That's on the federal level. Now on the
Right.
state level, they try to account for that by incorporating those students in the unduplicated count, which is why we've traditionally used some of our supplemental concentration grant towards some types of EL services.
Yeah, I meant federally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Federal, yes, right.
Yeah, I had a couple more questions, please. One of them is about when you get to the couple more pages down, it talks about certificated salaries and pupil services takes a pretty healthy drop, you know, nearly 20%. There it is, the 1,200. Okay, so, and the rest, it kind of stays sort of like you'd figure, a 2.5% increase to teachers, because that's sort of what it costs for a step and column, and supervisors and administrators, well, that's there. And so what I'm interested in is why are we talking pupil services like, not therapists, what are they, counselors and speech and
So-
language and things like that? Is that what that cluster is for, that 1,200?
So yeah, the 1,200 I believe is things like counselors,
Okay.
school psychologists. It's not speech. Speech are coded as teachers.
Oh, okay.
Counselors, school psychologist. I'd have to double check. I'm thinking perhaps it could be librarian. I'd have to confirm, but there's a possibility it could be librarian. And we did reallocate that into some teaching for this year.
Well, we
That's
also,
something I'd have to double check.
we also moved Jeff Kramer to Brookside and don't have Patty Dalton's position.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're right. So it's probably not the librarian. We have other services under the classified salaries.
Right. It's under classified, not under that.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, okay. Well, so what about when it talks about other employee, well, before we get down there, there's one more that it's under STRS and PERS employee benefits. What are other employee benefits that go from about $8,000 to nothing?
Other employee benefits.
It's a little farther down. It's under, see the very almost end of total employee
Yeah,
benefits?
the 3901 and 3902.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to double check. I believe that there are some things related to STRS and PERS that might hit there, because there are things that can happen sometimes where STRS will do like adjustments on prior salaries paid. So I'll have to double check to see if that hits there. The other thing is if we have annuities that would go there.
It's not like,
I think.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. But like, I was just thinking, you know, like, does it go into retirement and things like that? I mean, there's another spot in here, which we'll probably come to unless we just decide to finish this later, although I've marked it nearly all, where it talks about benefits that go to the retirees. And it's, you know, it is not $300,000 a year, which has always been something that has concerned me. And it was closer to like 900 and some thousand. Monday? Excuse me, what? The employee benefits or the retirement thing?
What you're just talking about.
Oh, the employee benefits is right where we are, the next to the bottom line of the middle section.
Yeah. But what was
Okay,
the other
and-
one you were talking about?
Oh, the one where it says retired people and the costs. That is, I'll find it. Oh, I knew I should have folded it. Well, I may have to get back to you and show you because I saw it and I thought, well, this isn't $300,000.
Well, we do have some of it is here under the benefits. So when we see where it says OPEB, that is other post-employment benefits. So that refers to something related to retirement.
Okay, so that's the
what you were looking at.
Yeah. It just struck me that it was like $900,000 or something, and I thought, well, that's not 300, which is good because.
Are you mixing that up with STRS, Paula?
Yeah. Well, no, STRS has got their chunks, although it went down. Is that what the governor was talking about? That he was going to drop the price, or Mark talked about that and said that that came from the state?
Yeah. So for this year, they basically. The net effect of what they did with PERS and STRS ended up kind of being neutral, I guess you could say, because they decreased STRS by a small amount and in PERS by a small amount. So they're not exactly, but I mean it. You know, it ended up being more neutral than what we would have expected because typically, you know, for years now they've been increasing it by a couple, you know, between 1 and 2 percentage points every year. And so they kind of put a pause basically on it for 2021 to help districts, but do be forewarned, like if you were to be looking at a multi-year projection, that's 1 year and they're still anticipating increases in future years. So we pause for this year and then show in our multi-year, you know, resuming the normal increases.
Oh, okay. What kind of insurance are they talking about when you go farther down the page? Farther down the page. It goes to services and other operating. There it is.
So that's our liability insurance.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So then so that you just figure the insurance won't go up and it stays the same all the time.
It's hard to predict. And, you know, I may at first interim, after we hear more back from our insurance folks, you know, we may budget an increase in anticipation. We're in an extremely uncertain times when it comes to insurance liabilities. There's a couple of things that have come up around that. One is some changes in statutes of limitations related to
Abuse and neglect.
Abuse and neglect.
Okay.
So there were some changes around that has really concerned the insurance industry and underwriting industry, and is somewhat unprecedented, so it becomes difficult for them to project what the impacts will be. And then also COVID, there's a lot, you know, there was some efforts by our insurance JPA to try to lobby with the state to limit or put in place some types of limits related to COVID liability. From what I understand, nothing successfully made it through that process. So it's a little unknown right now how that, you know, there may be unforeseen ways that trickles down to employers. And so, you know, overall, the increases for this usually would be based on, you know, JPA wide as well as specific district usage of insurance. But right now there's some other outside factors as well. So, you know, we may want to increase that budget going forward.
And what about payments to the county office? How come we owe them over over $30,000 now, but next year we owe them nothing?
Is that the one that's listed as tuition?
No, but I do have a question on it too, and on direct interfund costs, direct costs. We seem to have them and then we don't. I thought that was like the 4 or 8% or something that you paid to administer something.
You're looking at where it says the $57.50 for $247.81.
Yeah, that's the direct yeah.
So that one is just miscellaneous. So for instance, if our food service program were to essentially cater, like if we have a meeting and instead of buying snacks somewhere else, they have, you know, like the food service department put something together, we can't that in our Fund 13 where we do our normal food costs. So it's essentially just a miscellaneous expense for, you know, probably like back to school breakfast or, you know, miscellaneous meetings.
Oh, well, you know,
yes.
okay.
And so it's kind of a miscellaneous, you know, hard to predict item. Also, I'm anticipating that we'll have too many in-person meetings this year.
Probably not. However, on a couple pages over, it says interfund transfers that go out, hi honey, to the cafeteria fund are like $378,000.
Right. That's something that's a different interfund transfer. So what this interfund transfer is basically a direct cost. So instead of recognizing the expense in food service, we're recognizing the expense over here in the general fund. And so it may be, for instance, that like a principal has their discretionary fund and they use their discretionary fund to pay for supplies for a meeting. Now, the other one, the large one, that is our contribution to the food service program. So essentially that is how much more it costs us to operate food service versus what we received in revenue. It's the shortfall of revenue compared to expenses. So in the case of that is literally moving the funds over to support that program. Oh, I think you might be muted.
That was the big deal last year that prompted the district to look at the efficiency of the cafeterias and go over to wherever you guys went, Potter Valley or someplace, and check out
Correct.
the cafeteria management system, right?
Yes.
We're hoping
Okay.
Yes.
the number is significantly lower this year.
Is it okay? Because I know it projects for this coming year, it's going to be less than 200,000. And I remember last year there was a big discussion on how it could be maybe less than 100,000, even though other places are less than 40 or 50,000. But at least things are going to improve, and that's a good thing.
We're turning
And
the ship around.
One
Yeah,
of the
no,
things
that's a
I
good thing.
will say in terms of that amount, we're in a
Mhm.
difficult time for projecting food service revenue. It is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
tough to know what this will look like. We certainly lost revenue in 1920 due to the distance learning situation. We are still waiting to hear back. There was a waiver that we applied for, and so we're hoping to get some relief that would help offset the operating loss from 1920. No word yet whether they will offer something similar this year. Hard to know and predict the usage trends for our families, so it's tough to know what the budget will look like.
Remember, we're employing everybody still, wages, PERS, and everything, but we're doing way less meals that are reimbursable.
Yeah, no, I noticed. And that's why
We're
one
losing
of these
a ton of money
things,
at food service.
right. And I noticed on the cafeteria funding that it talks about there's, where was it? 100 and some, that's child development. Wait a minute. Anyway, there was a big chunk of money that was going to go out of the costs. And I figured that's because people were going to be rerouted or something. And I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. But is it here? No.
We're hoping also to have, a decrease to food expenses through some more competitive bidding. There's other things besides just the reorganization that we were trying to do to hopefully alleviate some of that.
Okay. Well, I just have an awful lot of questions about it, but what I'm finding is some of the numbers are just repeated because it's putting them on another form. The information is still the same, right?
True. And so when you look at this whole report with
Yeah.
Fund 1 here, those first 2 pages are really like the high level aggregate of everything in the fund. And then as you're going through these pages, it begins breaking down the expenditures and revenues into more specific categories, into more different funding sources, and by restricted and unrestricted. So you may see some things that are a repetition between the different pages.
Oh. Well, one thing I noticed a lot is that other outgo transfers of indirect costs, the amounts of money seem pretty different per category. Like in the cafeteria fund, it's $5,300. And in another fund, it's not near that.
So what they do for indirect costs, typically what they do is they put in place what they call the LEA approved rate. So it's sort of a generic agency-wide rate that we use as our default rate, and it's done on a year-by-year basis. And it's done by looking at prior years, to establish what a fair rate is based on our budget. But not all programs allow the LEA approved rate to be used. So there are examples such as food service, they max out at this statewide average, which generally tends to be lower than our approved rate. So we have to use the lower of that average or our approved rate, in which case it's the average. There's also, we are limited to 5% in the Child Development Fund, and I believe some of our CTE perhaps might have some limitations. So it does, there are some different rates that are used. And then when you look at this year compared to, or 1920 compared to 2021, you'll see some variances there as well, having to do both with if there's different amounts that you're expending and applying that percentage against, as well as a different rate. So our rate is different in 2021 than what we were allowed to use in 1920.
Oh, okay. And what about, this is the cafeteria fund and it says page 4. It talks about food, no, it says other local revenues, and then it says sales, sale of equipment and supplies. Now for food service sales, it seems to say there's 0. But for, unless I can get a little ruler here, let's see. Well, maybe they expect, I guess it's the equipment is the zeros, the one under it, 8634. Is that, anyway, it goes from whatever it was to 10 grand. Yeah, it must be the next page. No, that's page 1. Oh, it's sort of
So
beyond
wrong
child
fund.
development. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it talks about food service sales go from $4,500 to $10,000. And I was curious if that meant you think you're going to sell to a lot more people this year?
No,
yeah.
So that this year came in lower than I was anticipating. Again, it's been difficult to budget some of the items related to food service because we did this whole program change. So it was hard how that would change people's buying behaviors. And so ultimately we made a lot less in food service sales than what I anticipated. But the timing of these two columns is very different, right? So the one on the right, the 2021, that was what we adopted in August. Now I've done the closing, and this year it came in lower. At first, that's the type of thing I would look for and say, oh, we probably need to adjust that revenue down because it's unlikely we'll do more sales this year than we did last year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's what seemed kind of interesting.
That's just an issue of timing for the reporting cycles.
Yeah. So there, it seems like in all of the expenses, when it comes to conferences and travel, all of them but one have increased, all the budget brackets. So like for the cafeteria, it's doubled nearly. And for the, you know, the in general spending, you know, I guess teachers, administrators, whatever, it seemed to be the only one that wasn't going to go anyplace. And so is that kind of standard also, or is it just a fluke for this year too?
I'm not sure. That would be something I'd have to look at the page to be able to answer.
Oh, okay.
Nothing is jumping out at me just thinking about what I was intending with it. It may be the same thing as what we just talked about, where we anticipated something, and now that we're closing, we're seeing what 1920 looked like. You know, at the time that we did this budget, there was still some anticipation that we potentially could be doing in-person learning, and you know, that the whole issue of professional development is really on its ear right now, because of, you know, the social distancing issues and distance learning and such. We do have other expense for teacher professional development that is not listed yet in this budget done in August specifically into that category, but as we know is identified in the learning continuity plan that we looked at earlier. So ultimately, when I budgeted this, you know, we didn't know what some of these categories things would be in. So when you look at the expenditures for those one-time funds, they tend to just fall under materials and supplies because we have a sub-account called basically undesignated expense there that allows us to say, hey, we anticipate expending these dollars. We don't yet know what category they'll be in. And so now having an approved plan, those things then will be incorporated at the first interim update. And you may see some of it kind of shift from being in the 4300s account down into other places, teacher salaries, professional development, whatever the case may be. So there is some of that is earmarked already, as we know, for those things, but you're not necessarily seeing it in this document.
Oh.
But in terms of answering your question specifically to the change in the food service one, that I don't know offhand. I would have to look at that later.
Oh, okay. What about then farther back, almost to the end of this, well, maybe it's the middle of this budget. It talks about the bond interest and redemption fund. It's on page 5 of
does it say Fund 51 in the top corner?
Yeah,
or
Form 51.
Yeah. So Form 51, those are funds that actually do not reside within our regular budget. In fact, I don't even have, I was talking about the software that we use for our day-to-day management. Those funds are all kept at the Treasury, and this is the management of existing bonds. And so they manage the in and outflows of those bond funds. And then when we're closing the books, we have to incorporate that into our financial statements.
Okay, so then what it says on that page about the other outgo and you sort of need to probably turn another page or two.
Am I going the wrong way or the right?
Nope, whoops, you just sort of passed it.
Passed it? Oh, here we go.
There you go. And it says other outgo, and it doubles nearly. I mean, well, it doesn't. It 50% itself nearly. It's 881,000, and then it jumps to 1,300,000. So what causes something?
That has to do with the bond payment schedules, I believe. So those other outgoes are where the repayments get booked.
Okay, so what?
On a schedule that is, was probably put into place at the time of the issuance of those bonds.
Okay, so for last year, it means that 881,000 was collected, and next year you're expecting 1,300,000. And since these are unaudited actuals, it has nothing to do with Measure I, right? I mean, isn't this
nothing to do? Yeah, these are existing old bonds. The accounting for them goes on long after the revenue gets used, right? So this is all their long-term investment process that happens. And actually these two numbers you were looking at, the 881 and the 1.3 million, those are outflows. Those are not inflows. Those are very likely the repayment that was due on these outstanding bonds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the district.
I thought it was like
the district spent $14 million on the last bond. And I'm assuming that's the repayment schedule.
Yeah, and I don't, when we've talked with Adam in the past, right, he's done a great job of summarizing various of our old bond information. This doesn't split it out between those different issuances. It's a, aggregate of that. But ultimately, just as a heads up, when you're looking at these account codes, the 8,000, so how it has these numbers in the middle here, the 8,000s are the ones that are revenues. So just as like a visual cue when you're going through that. Anything that's 1,000, between 1,000 and 7,000s, all those range are expenditures, outflows, and anything that's an 8,000 are the inflows.
So then what that's saying is you have to double the pay, or 50% greater the payment this year.
The scheduled payment for that year is a higher payment, yeah.
Yeah.
But those are not monies that are coming out of our budget.
No.
Those are
Correct.
coming from-
They literally sit in a completely separate pot at the county treasury. They do not intermix or touch our general fund operations at all.
Oh,
These are revenues that the county collects from property taxes from the last
Yeah.
bond that they're going to use to pay off that bond issue over time.
Correct.
okay. That's sort of what I thought. Well,
Yeah.
okay, but I just couldn't be certain. And so then I just have two more, and one of them is, what is the professional consulting services on operational expenditures? Is that a person, or is that a cluster of in-services, or?
It could be
A couple
either, yeah.
$100,000 is all.
So which, are you back in the Fund 01 or?
No,
where-
I'm at Fund 67, which is self-insurance.
Got
And the
it.
reason it struck me was because I thought this had to do with the insurance that the district carries, the
Right.
whatever that's called, that comes with a consortium of a variety of districts. At this minute,
So
I can't
this
think of it.
this category is
Stay well. Mhm.
Yeah. So first of all, I will say this Fund 67 actually represents 3 different funds that roll together here. And
Oh.
so it's, and really most of Staywell does not end up, we see Staywell as expenditures up there related to our statutory benefits and things.
Mhm.
But we don't maintain a separate fund for Staywell because we're part of a JPA. And so that's all done
Yeah.
at the office. But what we do maintain our own funds for are dental and vision. And so really when we look at this 185, that is what we paid out on expenses for vision and dental bills, basically. So we're self-funded. When we have premium for that gets generated off of the monthly payroll, it comes into this fund, and that's the revenue that you see up above the local revenue.
Mhm.
Essentially, that's district money that just, we're paying that benefit on behalf of the employee, but we're paying it to ourselves. So we pay it into this fund, and then that way the money is here so that when we get the dentist bill or we get the eye doctor bill, we can pay the bill. And so that's what that money is the payment of medical bills, essentially. Not medical, vision, dental, sorry.
Right.
Okay, and so that's the same as enterprise? The numbers are the same. And that's a couple pages down, page 1 of Form 67. I mean, it's still 67, and we already had a page 1, but this is another page 1. It's, no, it's got 3 columns. Yeah, maybe it's this one. I'm pretty positive.
So this is the revenue side of that
Yep.
fund. So the other one,
Nope.
yeah, that was the
Yeah, it must be the
expenditure
next
side.
page.
Next one.
Yeah, no, I think it's the next one. My mistake. Well, no, that's not it either.
Here we go. Is this it?
There we go. Yeah. So it's called enterprise, or whatever it's called. Yeah, number 6, it's called enterprise. But it is exactly those numbers, the $185,302.95.
I'm not sure I'm looking at
It's
the
all
right.
kind of the same. I didn't know.
I don't see enterprise. Typically,
Oh, well, maybe we should turn another page. But if you think of those numbers and you go to another page, yeah, because that's 7. And 8, and there we go. Now we're coming to this guy again. There he is. And it says, number 6, enterprise, 185. Oh, maybe it's a different number. Maybe I mixed up my 185 and my 183. Nope, it's the same number. Okay.
Form 67, self-insurance.
Yeah, you're right. Just go back down where it says
Yeah.
expenses B, then it goes
To
to
be
number
honest,
6.
So typically enterprise is used, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of an example. If a district was sort of operating anything as a profit center, sometimes enterprise coding is used. I typically don't have it coded there, and I am not sure why the software would be grouping it that way, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just sometimes
it
some
does
of the
seem-
amounts of money are exactly the same.
Oh, I apologize. You know what I'm seeing here? It took me a second to catch up to this. So what this page is, this is a restatement of a different part of the, now it says,
Of a couple pages before?
this might be showing the functions. Yeah, it is. Okay. So when we're dealing with our account codes, we have, they're like, it's a huge string of accounts, and each part of the account says something different about it. So this is breaking, it's just slicing the pie in a different way. This is a different part of the account code. And for instance, we could talk about, as an example, teacher salary. If we were looking up above, it would be classified as a certificated salary. But in the context of function, we would call it a number 1, instruction. So it describes more what the purpose is as opposed to what the item actually is. So it's just a different angle of looking at it, but it's the same colors.
Okay, well then that makes
Object
better
of what it
sense.
is.
Right. The
That's
function.
why it says objects up above. It's the
Well, so objects break down like what we talked about before, like service is an object, salary is an object, and this incorporates all objects within 1007,999. But it's what's the purpose of those? What's the purpose of those expenditures? And in this case, because this is like a self-funded insurance plan, they consider that to be part of enterprise. In other words, we wouldn't represent this expenditure as being an expenditure related specifically to instruction. You know, it doesn't fall into those other categories.
Oh. Okay. All right, well, thanks. The rest of it I'll study a little more. See if I can't use the same answers for other stuff.
Feel free to email me if you have any other ones.
No, I appreciate it because I often think, no, I understand this. And then all of a sudden things repeat and I go, well, no, I don't understand it anymore.
Yeah.
So, okay, good, thanks.
They sometimes, I think, make it a little more complicated than maybe it needs to be, but it is a huge amount of data, and they try, I think, to find the right ways to represent it in the most accurate way possible. And this cutting it in different directions can be very important. There's different times we're looking at it for different reasons. And so
yeah,
when it looks like it's a repetition, but there's times where, depending on what your question is, you might look at it differently.
Okay, well, I noticed that every year it's supposed to be by September, and the last few years it's been more on time than before. And I'm just wondering if, maybe there's a way that, I know it pushes you probably, I would imagine it does, but if you could have, like, we could receive something a couple of days early. Here I'm just saying, thank you, I got it all day, but a couple of days extra, then at least it'd be easier for some of us to look it over, and maybe half my questions would be gone instead of sticking you with them, or any number of things.
Yes,
Anyway, it would be
and I
handy.
know that Alex has made that request as well. I've really definitely tried to
Yeah, no, I'm
have
sure you try.
there,
It's
and I
just
will
hard.
continue to try to improve that.
Yeah, no, well, it is better than it used to be a long time ago. It never came in September, or it seemed to come, October or sometime, but this is good, thanks. Yeah, are you leaving? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Anyway, so thank you.
Yeah, and another option that you always have, Paula, and it certainly helped me, was to basically sneak in when Nikki's got some time and literally go over the budget and get a better general overview of how it's put together. And
Yeah.
but it will help answer a lot of those questions about, because a lot of it has to do with just the format that it's presented in.
Yeah.
And
Do we
the
have software for other kinds of formatting?
I don't think it would be clearer to you. Let me put it that way.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
what we
the
have
stuff
now,
that-
yeah, what we have
Yeah,
now
the
is
stuff
far
that I-
quicker than we had 4 or 5 years ago.
The daily use stuff that I'm in is at such a broken out level of detail. It would be hard for you to see the forest for the trees, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, and I know it takes up time. Sometimes I just sort of think that part of my responsibility, though, and maybe this is having taught for so many years, is to make sure everybody gets to understand it that's listening. I mean, it used to be that, you know, I couldn't ask questions because I didn't know enough to know which questions to ask. And it takes
Right.
years. And I know a long time ago, we used to get trainings through the association or whatever else, but those are not as frequent as they used to be. And it just hopefully clarifies it for more than just me.
Well, I certainly don't mind answering the questions at all. You know, I put a lot of time into it. So,
Yeah.
you know, it does
Okay.
not me to help clarify it.
Oh, well, good. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other board members, or I should say, does anybody else have any questions with respect to the budget? This is the 2019-20 budget, that the unapproved or the unaudited actuals. Hearing no, do we have a motion to approve the unaudited actuals report?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the unaudited actuals report.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Excuse me, somebody speak up.
Aye.
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 Okay. Let's see. We already have another board meeting scheduled for October. Do we want to move forward to public comments for items not on the agenda?
Nikki, will you unshare?
Oh, yes. Sorry, there you go.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay. We talked briefly. Do we want to put Proposition 15 as an action item for our October agenda?
Really, I would like that. If it doesn't get voted, then it doesn't get voted. But I do think it would be handy for our community to know whether the district does or doesn't support Proposition 15.
Okay. Mark, if you could arrange that.
Trina, you got that, I assume?
Yeah.
I got that.
Thank you.
Okay, so failing that, no public comments for items not on the agenda. Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Sorry.
Okay.
Good.
And a second?
I'll second. I have a question, as usual. When in October is the next meeting? Isn't it the 12th or something, or?
I believe that's right.
Okay.
Whatever the
Okay.
second Wednesday is.
It's October
Yeah.
14th.
Oh, okay. It's just the way it
14th.
sort of sounded was like, we already have another one scheduled, and I thought, I missed a special meeting, and I wasn't sure. Okay.
No, it's not far off, so 2 weeks away.
No, I know this is, okay.
Okay, so it's motioned and seconded for an adjournment. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, good night.